Eastside Online. We are so excited that you have joined us this week. If this is your first time tuning in with us, I personally want to welcome you, and I think you're going to love today's service. Today, we're continuing our series called Promises, where we're talking about God's promise of heaven. But before we get into worship, I'm going to ask you to do something. If you could, please share this. And this is so important because the more that we share this, the more that people get to hear about Jesus. We're also going to be continuing our more intimate approach towards worship this week. And in a few minutes, we're also going to have communion. So this is a great time to go ahead and get your bread or cracker and juices together, all of your elements. And then Dave is going to be talking about God's promise of heaven. So if you could, please stand to your feet, get ready for worship, and get ready for your hearts to receive the word of God.
Sometimes on this journey, I get lost in my mistakes. What looks to me like weakness is a canvas for your strength. And my story isn't over, and my story's just begun. And failure won't define me, 'cause it's what my Father does. Said failure won't define me, 'cause it's what my Father does. Shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Oh, you're in the Father's house. And arrival's not the end game, the journey's where you are. Never wanted perfect, you just wanted my heart. The story isn't over if the story isn't good, 'cause failure's never final when the Father's in the room. I said failure's never final when the Father's in the room. Prodigals come home, and the helpless find hope, 'cause love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Prison doors swing wide as the dead come to life, 'cause love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Come on. Miracles take place as a single fight. Jericho walls are quaking, strongholds now are shaking. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. I said love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Oh, lay your burdens down. Oh, here in the Father's house, check your shame. Mountains are still being moved, strongholds are still God, we believe it. Yes, we can see it. The wonders are still what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. Set our hearts on you. Come and do what you do. 'Cause we need to move. We need to move. Bodies still be raised. Hey! Giants are still being slain. God, we believe it. Yes, we can see it. The wonders are still what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. Set our hearts on you. Come and do what you do. 'Cause we need to move. We need to move. 'Cause miracles happen when you move. Healing is coming in this room. Miracles happen when you move. Heaven is coming. Miracles happen when you move. Healing is coming in this room. Miracles happen when you move. Heaven is coming. This is a move. This is a move. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. We are here for you. Come and do what you do. Set our hearts on you. Come and do what you do. 'Cause this is a move. This is a move. This is a move. This is a move. So much has changed in our lives in the last few months. Today actually marks the 7th Sunday that we've been having online services in our homes. Today marks the 7th Sunday since we've been in this building together, physically been able to worship together. So very much has changed in our lives in these last few months. You know, since we've been having online services in our home, one thing we've always done together as a family is take communion together. We've shared this precious moment together each week. So we go through the house, we get a little bit of bread, a cracker, as my wife said last week, maybe a Cheez-It, some juice. Whatever we have in the house, we prepare that and we take communion together. Now, our little daughter, Ivy, she's 14 months now, and she's obviously way too young to understand what communion is, to take communion, to understand the magnitude of why we do this. But I've noticed something these last 7 weeks. I've noticed that when we take the bread and when we pass the cup, when we're praying over our communion, she's watching. She's learning from us. She's seeing what we do. You know, I love in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, as Jesus is eating the Last Supper with the disciples. I love these words he uses. I'm going to read this to us today. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread. When he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. So he set the example. He showed them what to do, and the disciples, they learned from him. So check this out, church. We're doing the same thing in our homes. We are taking communion together. We are proclaiming the Lord's death until he comes again. And the exact same way that the disciples were looking to Jesus, their Father, for an example, we are setting the example in our homes for our families and for our children. And so check this out. As we take communion together today, I want you to remember something, and I want you to be challenged in this. That we do this as others watch. So let's set an example. Because even in the midst of everything that's going on, so many things have changed. But setting an example for others, this part of our lives has not changed at all. Let's pray. Father, thank you for setting the example for us in your word. For sitting with a group of men and teaching them what it was to take communion together. For saying, this is my body, it's broken for you. This is my blood, it's shed for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And so today we take that, we remember. We thank you for your example. And God, we ask you to continue to teach us to be an example to our families and our children and those around us. We love you, Jesus. Amen. Give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord, 'cause it's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, we pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It is your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praises to your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praises to your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Pour out our praise to you only, Lord. It's your breath. All the Father saw the days of old. Would you do it again? Would you do it again? All the stories told, all the miracles. Would you do it again? Would you do it again? You said consecrate yourselves to me. See amazing things. We need your revival, Holy Spirit fire, burning ever brighter in our souls. Kings and kingdoms falling, hear your people calling. King of kings, we need a miracle. There's a time to sow and a time to reap. Would you do it again? Would you do it again? There's a time to heal and a time to mend. Would you do it again? Would you do it again? You said consecrate yourselves to me. revival, Lord. Holy Spirit, come. 'Cause the King is among us. His glory surrounds us. His fire is falling as we sing. The Savior's for us. His love is victorious. Revival is rising in this place. The King is among us. His glory surrounds us. His fire is falling as we sing. The Savior's for us. His love is victorious. And revival is rising in His name. The King is among us. His glory surrounds us. His fire is falling as we sing. And the Savior's for us. And His love is victorious. And revival is rising in His name. And the King is among us. His glory surrounds us. And His fire is falling as we sing. And the Savior's for us. And His love is victorious. And revival is rising in His name. We see revival rising up. We see revival rising up. Lord, we see revival in His name.
The King is among us. Man, that's one of my favorite worship songs of all time. I tease Aquila. Every time you put that in a service, man, I'm going to ask the elders to give you a raise. Hadn't happened yet, but I'm going to still keep trying to get that. I love that song. So check this out. I don't know about y'all, but man, I miss baseball so much. Baseball's been a part of my life as long as I can remember. As a little guy, growing up in central Illinois, I mean, every summer day, me and my buddies are out there on the sand lot choosing up teams. Back in those days, you were either a Cardinal fan or a Cub fan, one or the other, growing up in the 70s. And so you'd pick which player you're going to be. And I can kind of close my eyes and hear somebody say, man, I'm going to be Lou Brock. And somebody else, I'm going to be Ernie Banks. And some of y'all don't even remember those names, but they were big dudes back then, man, in baseball. I watched all those guys with my dad and my brother on television. Man, baseball was just a part of my life growing up. I became an uncle a little bit later in life, and I'd go watch my nephews play ball and loved to do that. Some of them got really good, had some playing time in college and even in the minor leagues a little bit. Then I became a dad, and shout out to all you guys at Highview Athletic League. Man, we spent summer after summer coaching my boys, and baseball was just a part of life, man. And now I'm kind of in the great uncle stage, and I love to get off on summer evenings and go watch my little great nephew, Dugan Graham, man, smash a double down towards the left field fence or dive for a line drive somewhere. Mark it down. Remember that name. He's gonna be somebody. And it's gonna come a day when my grandkids are playing, and I'm gonna be the grandpa that I'm gonna be out on the other side of the center field fence. You've seen them all. I'm gonna be sitting in a lawn chair. I'm gonna be rocking those white socks up to the kneecaps. I'm gonna be threatening to beat up the 12-year-old umpire. Baseball, man, has always been a part of my life, and I really miss it. It's been kind of rattling in my brain a little bit this week as I've been working on this message. One, because I haven't been able to start the season, and so I'm kind of missing that. But did you know this? Watch this. That 31 years ago this week was the great film Field of Dreams released to theaters. 31 years, man, that is crazy. And many of you will remember one of the great scenes in there where shoeless Joe Jackson is about to move back into the cornfield, and he turns around and looks at Ray Kinsella, who kind of put all this together, and he asks him a question we all remember. He looks at him and says, man, is this heaven? And Ray looks at him and says, no, man, this is Iowa. And that scene has always been running through my brain this last week. I've been talking about this concept of heaven. And we're kind of in the middle of this series. We're talking about the promises that God has given to us. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about the promise of heaven that he's given to us. And I just want you to know that whether you're from Iowa or Indiana or Kentucky or Illinois or wherever you're at, man, when we're done with this study, I think you're going to find out that heaven is beyond your wildest imaginations. And I want to encourage you today. I want to pump you up. I want to make you feel great about the promise of heaven that God has given you. And I think it's a great place to start when you think about that movie a lot of us love, to ask the question, really, where is heaven? What is the location of heaven? And just so you know, that's a debatable issue. There are Bible scholars that go different ways on that question. And what I'm going to share with you today is I'm going to share with you a general concept of one of the views of that question. And so when you and I get together and we say, okay, if we're going to understand the promise of heaven that God has given us, where's it at, Dave? Where is it at? And so I want to give you a concept of where the location of heaven is, and you're going to find out why it's important when we get done into the message. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to think of 3 phases. 3 phases of heaven in a real general sense, and every phase of heaven has a very specific location. And you'll follow along with that as I go through. So check this out first. I want you to think of this first phase in this way, that it's a little bit down here right now. Now let me explain that a little bit with you about telling you a guy by the name of Eric. And when I use the name Eric, that's not his real name, because I want to protect him and I want to protect his story. But if I were to tell you about Eric's life story, I would simply say that early in the first part of his life, a lot of bad surroundings and a lot of bad choices ended up with him having to pay a really serious debt to our society. And I met Eric on the other end of that. I met Eric when his freedom was given back to him. He told me a story one time that he'd got his freedom back as an adult, and most of his life had been spent incarcerated. And he said, Dave, when I got free, man, one of the things I want to do was get a driver's license. And so he had a coach teaching him how to drive. And he said he's driving this car and learning how to drive as an adult. And he looked at his coach and he said, you know, when I think about that, this is the very first time I think I've ever driven a car sober. And she said, well, you're not doing any better than when you were drinking, so you got to really learn how to do this. And the whole idea about Eric's story is a lot of those guys, you know this, a lot of those guys end up right back where they came from. But somewhere between incarceration and freedom, Eric met Jesus. And if you were to talk to him about his story, it is really clear that Eric came to understand that he is never going to be back where he came from. If you came to our church on a weekend, you would find that Eric's one of the very first people to ever show up on this campus every Sunday morning, getting here early, walking around, just praying that God would do some crazy stuff that day, that God would be active. He comes early to find out, are there any volunteer areas where somebody didn't show up, we need some help, and I want to be a part of that. And almost every Monday, all of our staff can get and grab their voicemail, and Eric's on that on Monday mornings telling us how incredibly thankful he is for how God used us to minister him that weekend. He's an incredible man. I walked this week walking through our building, and I saw Eric over there, and we haven't been in our building for a few weeks now, and I saw Eric over there, and And I said, man, how you doing? And he'd been working on some things here in our building that he has a skill set for. And I said, how you doing, man? And he said, well, I've been furloughed from my job, and so I'm not able to go to my job now. And I said, man, are you okay? And he said, Pastor, he said, I'm furloughed, but I'm paid. I get paid for not going to work, and I'm able to take my skills, the things I like to do, and I can come to this place that I love, and I can be a blessing to this place. And if you sat down and talked with a man like that, who had one type of a life at one point in his life, and now once he'd got centered in Jesus, a totally different life, and you ask him to describe that transition, I can almost promise you Eric would use the term heaven. That in comparison to what he has right now, to what he came from, this is heavenly, and he would be exactly right. Because when you and I consider where is heaven, where is that at, it begins right here, right down on this earth, when a person centers their life in Jesus. And when Jesus becomes a part of their life, they find out that life is all that God would want it to be. Check this incredible verse from the words of Jesus. He said, I've come that you may have life and have it to the full. That Jesus said, I came so that you would learn what life is about. That when I become a part of your life, that all the fullness of everything that I want life to be, that's going to be yours. Some versions use the word abundant. That when your life gets abundantly centered in Jesus, you begin to sense a part, a sliver, an aspect of what heaven must really be like. And I just want to be kind of honest with you, and I want to kind of get down into the nitty-gritty with some of you today and ask that. Because I believe that there's probably people watching this today that you would say, you know, for my life, there's something missing, man. There's just something empty. There's just something not there. There's something that just is a sadness and a heaviness over me. And I don't want to be oversimplifying on this thing, but I want to ask you something. Have you ever considered to try Jesus? Because the Bible teaches that when we're living on this earth, you don't have to die on this earth to experience heaven. You just have to start living for Jesus. And when Jesus becomes a part of your life, life gets full and abundant and joyful. And my friend Eric and hundreds of other people who are watching this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because if somebody came to you and said, damn, tell me, where is heaven right now? You'd say, man, it's happening with me right now because Jesus is in my life. So I want you to start with that concept of heaven, that there's a little bit of heaven right here, right down on this earth right now, but doesn't end there. It moves on to a second phase of heaven, and I want you to see this. It's a little more up there for a while. Now, the Bible teaches a technical thing. I want you to hang with me on this and understand this. The Bible teaches a thing called an intermediate state. Now, when I talk about the intermediate state, what I am describing is the time frame between when a person on this earth dies and when Jesus returns someday. And that time frame right here is where you and I are at right now, is referred to as an intermediate state. Now, you and I think of that in terms of heaven. We know people that are not here anymore. They live for Jesus on the earth. They experience a little bit of heaven right here, and then they died, and then we use the term that they're now in heaven, and we think of heaven in that sense, that it's kind of up there for a while. Now, it's interesting to me that the Bible tells us very little about that state. We kind of think of heaven in those terms right now. And the reality is the Bible doesn't talk too much about it. We know a few things about it. Check this verse out when Paul wrote it. Paul was talking about the possibility he was going to die and he was going to end up in heaven. And notice what he said. He said, I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. Now, we know a few things about what heaven is like during this intermediate state. We don't know a lot. We don't know a few. We know you're with Jesus. It's not some unconscious soul sleep somewhere. There is really some activity, some consciousness that you're living with Jesus. We also know that it is better than anything that we'd ever experience here. And so Paul talked about it as this thing where I'm going to go and experience life that is better than anything that I ever experienced here. There's a guy by the name of Randy Alcorn's done a lot of work scholarly on heaven. And Randy had a beautiful concept about what heaven is like right now, kind of up there. And Randy talks about this idea that he said, think of this as kind of a layover. And if you're flying somewhere, if you're flying in this part of the country and you head out of Louisville Airport, no matter where you're going, you're probably going to end up in Atlanta first. They're going to take you to Atlanta before you go to your final destination. And most people around here who you fly, you understand that. Wherever you go, you're going to start in Atlanta. Alcorn said, think of the intermediate state as a layover. It's not your final destination. Our final destination that we'll see in a minute is the completion of heaven. Where you're at right now is somewhat of a layover. Now, it's an incredible layover. It's way better than what you and I have, but it's not the completed form of heaven yet. Now, this gets a little touchy for some of us because most of us know people who are in heaven up there right now for a while. And I just want you to understand, it is not a completed state according to the Bible. There's things that are missing. They don't have a body yet. We don't have the actual completion of all that heaven will be someday. None of that is there. The gathering of the whole collection of the body of believers, we're not all there yet. It's incomplete, but it is way better than anything we have right now. I would suggest that we learn to do this, is that we learn to quit referencing the fact that they're home. Because they're not home yet. They're closer to home than you and I are right here, but they're not quite home yet. Because home happens in the third and final phase of what heaven is. And if you look on the screen there, you'll see it is eventually back down here forever. Now, this is what I mentioned earlier when I talked about locations of heaven and where heaven is. I mentioned that it is debatable. There are different viewpoints, and what we're sharing today is one exciting viewpoint of heaven, and it's this, that at the return of Jesus, that Jesus comes back to the earth, and this earth that we're living on right now is transformed into a beautiful location that will become heaven for all of eternity back down here on the earth. Now, I want to show you a couple things in the Bible about that, and then you understand why I'm even talking about it. I want to go to the end of the Bible and show you something. It's in Revelation chapter 21. It's the first verse. And the last two chapters in the book, Revelation 21 and 22, begin to describe for us the completion of what heaven will be. And I want you to see this. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Now, we got to be a little bit technical with this, so hang with me on this. I want to show you something here on the screen. In the Bible days, they had a couple different words that they used for the word new. And you'll see up here real quickly that one of the words they used was called neos, and neos referred to anything that was new in origin. In other words, something comes up that has never existed before. And so I put as an example, if you build a brand new home, that is a neos home. It's never ever existed. Now, another word that the Greeks would use for the word new is a word kainos, and it meant new in quality. It talked about something that already existed. It's just been renewed. It's just been made better. And I put here about weight loss. So if you happen to lose 50 pounds on an incredible diet, which nobody is doing during quarantine, are they? But if that happened, at the end of the 50 pounds being gone, you would say, I have a new body. Now, you don't have a new body in the sense that, okay, that didn't exist anymore. It's just been made better in quality. Now, I mentioned all of that. I hope you didn't lose me on that. I mentioned all of that is because when John talks about a new heaven, a new earth, he uses the word kainos. That when Jesus returns, it's not, okay, there's something totally that never existed before. No, it is the transformation. It is the renewal of God's whole creation. He changes it. He makes it new. He makes it kainos. Now, that same concept is taught to us by Peter. I want you to see how Peter says it. Peter said, the day of the Lord will come like a thief. We talked about that a little bit last week. And the heavens will disappear with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything in it will be laid bare. If you've ever heard that the earth is just going to burn up at the return of Jesus, that's where that is coming from. And we don't have a lot of detail about that from the biblical material. What we know is that something of a cataclysmic nature will happen at the return of Jesus, where the earth and the heaven, as you and I know it, will no longer cease to exist in that type of quality. We don't know what it'll be, but something will happen. Now watch just a few verses later. Watch this. We are looking forward to a new kainos heaven and a new kainos earth, the home of righteousness. This particular view teaches us that when Jesus returns, he will take our present earth and he will transform it. He will renew it. He will make it completely different. And all of those who centered their life in Jesus, the community of the righteous, they will now live on that new earth forever and ever and ever and ever. So Dave, what is the location of heaven? Well, it depends on when you're talking. If you're talking right now, there's a little bit of heaven right here, down here on this earth for you and I when we live the way Jesus has called us to live. There is a little bit more heaven up there for those who are gone for a while, because the totality of heaven will happen when Jesus returns and changes this earth into the eternal home forever and ever and ever. And so that brings up an important question, and that's what I want you to chew on. What's going to be different? What's going to be different about this earth when God creates it completely different, when he renews it? What is the difference? Well, I think you can see the difference of that if you were to go all the way back in the book of Genesis. And I want you to see something that happens. In Genesis chapter 3, you all know the story, Adam and Eve, and they sin, and then God hunts them down, and God says, cursed is the ground because of you. So God had created this beautiful earth with man and woman, and now all of a sudden, watch this, the earth is now cursed. The very next chapter, we have the two brothers who have now come into the world, Cain and Abel. They get into a brotherly spat. Cain kills Abel. God hunts down Cain, who'd killed his brother. Notice what he said to Cain. You are under a curse. Now watch this, because it'll knock your socks off your feet if you catch this. In the Hebrew language, the word curse meant to tie something up and bind it and hold it back. What we know in the Genesis text is that when sin entered the world, watch this, God had created this beautiful creation for man and women to live on, the totality of everything that God had in store for what he wanted for his people. And then sin entered the world, and what did sin do? It tied them up, it held them back, it bound them so that they could not get to experience the beauty that God had in store for them. Have you ever, at any point in your life, felt that something is holding me back? There's got to be something more than what I'm experiencing in this world. Things have got to get better at some point in my life. What's happening? The curse. The curse is happening. And the earth in which you and I live on is a place where we are bound up, we're tied, we're held back so that we are unable to experience the beauty of all that God has in store for us. And all through the Old Testament, you see pictures of the curse, where men and women are defeated and held back from all that God is able to grant them. As the word then moves into the New Testament, it begins to carry a different concept. And the concept of curse in the New Testament then becomes one that destroys you and kills you. And so place all that together, that because we live on an earth that has sin in it, and that you and I are a part of that, we live lives held back, unable to experience all that God has in store, and instead we live destructive, lives painful. We're not able to grab what God has in view of life, all because of the curse. It gives you a totally different viewpoint as you start looking around the world and wondering what is going on. How in the world, in the flip of a finger like that, can the entire globe come to a standstill because of a virus? How does that happen? The curse. Last Sunday, I got out of the house. It was a nice day in the afternoon, needed some fresh air, and started walking around a golf course over by where I live, social distancing, totally by myself. I come around the curve and I see a foursome of young men over here. They're playing golf together. And as I turn around, I look over and I notice immediately something is wrong. And I smell the stench of marijuana in an incredible odor and alcohol. And here's these four young men. They're loud, they're obnoxious, they're unable really to stand up, they're vulgar. And I'm looking at four young men who ought to have the world by the tail. And I look at them and say, how do you get to that? How do you get to that condition? The curse. And so one text comes to me, describes the despair of unemployment, and an email comes to me and describes what it's like to be lonely in a home where you have nobody else there and can't leave. And a phone call comes and asks for advice on how to ease the pain of divorce. And a Zoom call finds a teenager opening up to her friends about what do you do when your parents are passed out on the couch from drugs. And you hear stories like that and you wonder, what in the world has happened? The curse has happened. And if you've struggled at any point in your life recently and wondered why, the why is always the curse. And so the day arrives in which Jesus returns, and he takes the earth and he turns it into a kainos earth. It's a different earth. It's a new earth. It's a rejuvenated earth. And so what's different from that, from what you and I deal with every day? And we're given the hint. In the last chapter of the Bible, Revelation 22, verse 3, with clarity and simplicity, no longer will there be any curse. What's that mean? I'm not held back from the fullness of life, the abundant life that God created us for. Nothing holds me back. Nothing ties me down. Nothing destroys me. Nothing hurts me. There is no curse. And so you begin to think about all of the incredible, joyful things of what it would be if life was like that without a curse. And so somebody says, will there be roller coasters in heaven? Yes. And you won't throw up when it goes down because there's no curse. Will there be ice cream in heaven? Yes. Amen. Yes. Chocolate fudge all over it. And no calories, because there is no curse. Will there be football? Yes. And the Cowboys are going to win every game because there's no curse. Now, some of you want to go back to the old earth now, don't you? So here's the deal. God has promised that when Jesus is the center, promises it. Now take that idea and apply it to the lyrics of this song, because he promises no curse.
When the weight of life begins to fall on the name of Jesus I will call. For I know my God is in control. His purpose is unshakable. Doesn't matter what I feel, doesn't matter what I see, my hope will always be your promises to me. So I'll cast it out of fear, for your love has set me free. My hope will always be your promises to me. As I walk into the days to come, I will not forget what you've done. For you have supplied my every need, yeah. And your presence is enough for me, yeah. Doesn't matter what I feel, doesn't matter what I see, my hope will always be your promises to me. So I'm casting out all fear, for your love has set me free. My hope will always be your promises to me. You'll always be more than enough for me. You'll always be more than enough for me. Nothing's gonna stop the plans you've made. Nothing's gonna take your love away. You will always be more than enough for me. You will always be more than enough for me. You will always be more than enough for me. Nothing's gonna stop the plans you've made. Nothing's gonna take your love away. You will always be more than enough for me, yeah. You will always be more than enough for me. Lift your voice. You will always be more than enough for me. 'Cause nothing's gonna stop the plans you've made. Nothing's gonna take your love away. You will always be more than enough for me. Doesn't matter what I feel, doesn't matter what I see, my hope will always be your promises to me. So I'm casting out all fear, for your love has set me free.
God has given us the promise and the hope of heaven. Please join us next week as Winston closes out the series called God's Promise of the Holy Spirit. If you haven't given your tithe yet online this week, this is the perfect time to do that. You can give on our app or you can give on our website. And please, let's remain faithful in giving during this time. I hope you guys have a wonderful Sunday, and we'll see you next week. Bye.